What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so getting into Spider-Geddon, this is actually the Zero issue. This is kind of the one that's somewhat of a prelude. In all honesty, it really could just be considered Edge of Spider-Verse, but as a Zero issue, here's one of the things to bear in mind. For those of you guys who are new, Zero issues were actually originally pioneered by Valiant Comics back in the early 1990s, but DC co-opted them and then started turning them into like origin stories and things like that. But when it comes to Zero issues, they're essentially just preludes, is really all they are. But at the end of the day, this one, the reason why I say it could be considered like Edge of Spider-Geddon is because the Edge of Spider-Geddon stories were designed to either reintroduce, were really just designed to reintroduce you to existing characters. That's why we didn't really cover it outside of like Spider-Punk, is because, you know, when it came to like Edge of Spider-Verse, that was like all these different versions of Spider-Man. Edge of Spider-Geddon is just like, hey guys, remember those Spider-Man from Spider-Verse? Well, here they are again. And that's really all it was. But this one is particularly cool because what this does is it brings the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man into the fold of Marvel Comics. And we knew it was only ever a matter of time, right? Like at this point, like for the most part, Marvel Comics is just kind of copying what the MCU does, and then is also just like grabbing things from stuff like video games and so on and so forth. So for the most part, Marvel's not really standalone too much anymore in terms of their comics. I mean, they are to a degree, but it's I guess it's really bringing them closer in line, but for the most part, just kind of doing what the MCU does. And so with this in mind, what we end up doing here is picking up with the you know, PlayStation Man, like Play Spider. I don't know what to call him. Like he needs a version of, he needs a Spider-Man kind of nickname that's okay. I'm gonna leave that to you guys. He needs a Spider-Man nickname that ties him into the PlayStation 4, you know, so like Game Spider or something like that. I don't really know, but anyway, so PS4 Spider-Man is basically dealing with a villain with Tarantula. Now, Tarantula is an interesting character. I mean, not really interesting, but he's a character that goes back a little ways in Marvel Comics. I mean, he doesn't go like far back. I mean, he doesn't go like super far back, but he is still a relatively interesting character in terms of the role that he plays. And what I mean here is Tarantula was originally introduced back in 1974 with Amazing Spider-Man number 134 as part of Jerry Conway's run, and the idea was that he was essentially like a revolutionary in South America. The idea was that as part of this revolutionary group, while they were okay with using extreme tactics, what this did is it created kind of a rule of like, hey, this is what we do, but like we don't take the life of innocents if we don't need to. And Tarantula actually killed a security guard, which in turn got him exiled, but the government turned him into kind of like a fascist Captain America. But then when he killed an innocent guy yet again, the government booted him out, and then he took up residence in New York. And he fought Spider-Man for a little while, but he was never like a major player, right? Like he was like Spider-Man's version of like Batroc the Leaper, more or less, from like Captain America. And it was okay. I mean, it was cool for what it was, but he was never like a big name, right? Like he was never on par with like Doctor Octopus or anybody along those lines. But in the PS4 universe, he's actually more akin to like Iron Spider in terms of like the technology he has and how he uses it. But again, it's not a great big huge thing because of course Spider-Man defeats him relatively easily by using a spider bomb, and that's when Superior Spider-Man shows up. Now, this is when things start to get a little bit hairy because at the time that we have Superior Spider-Man in the story, we also have Superior Octopus in the main Marvel universe. Like that is Doctor Octopus after the events of Clone Conspiracy, basically the new Clone Saga, where he basically duplicates his own body. Because remember, Doctor Octopus's original body died. He put his consciousness in Peter Parker's body and took over Peter Parker's body during Superior Spider-Man. And so when Peter Parker got his body back, the consciousness of Doctor Octopus was put inside a robot. And so after the events of Clone Conspiracy, he cloned his own body, and then he came back as Doc Ock and became Superior Octopus, and that fed into Secret Empire. And so with this whole thing happening, like in reality, at least as far at the time this story's being told, which is to say in issue number 0, we don't know how Superior Spider-Man's back, or if we do, I don't know. So maybe I missed something. I'm not entirely sure. But it's basically Superior Spider-Man meeting PS4 Spider-Man, and it's awesome. Which, by the way, can we all just admit that the costume of Peter Parker in the PlayStation 4 game is probably one of the best versions of the Spider-Man costume ever? Like the original Spider-Man costume, that I mean, you'll never get better than that because it's classic. But like in terms of all the variations of the Spider-Man costumes we've seen, I would say if I had to put it in order, I would say the original Spider-Man costume, Superior Spider-Man, Miles Morales, PS4. Like I love this version. It's pretty cool the way it's set up. Now, one of the things about the two of these characters meeting each other is, remember, for those of you guys who never played the PlayStation 4 version of Spider-Man, when it came to that version of Doctor Octopus, there's history there, more so than you would expect, in the sense that when it comes to the PS4 Spider-Man, this is a scenario where when Doctor Octopus of the PlayStation universe came into existence, he was a business partner alongside Norman Osborn. And the idea was to kind of change the world, right? It was like their own mini version of the Future Foundation or like Horizon Horizon Labs. And what this did is it turned into a scenario where Norman Osborn just basically started focusing on money. And this kind of left Doctor Octopus, or I guess Otto Octavius, disheartened. So we started Octavius Industries. And the issue was that because he was essentially kind of funded by Norman Osborn, that's really how he was able to pull off all the things that he was doing. At the end of the day, where Peter Parker became kind of like a protege, and Octavius took Peter Parker under his wing, the result was that with Octavius's projects being considered failures by Norman Osborn took everything, like literally took everything from Octavius, and that left him basically bitter and disgruntled. So in turn, he became a villain with the intention of just like tearing down everything Norman Osborn loved. This brought him and Spider-Man into conflict, and because of the fact that Octavius had been using toxins in order to use his octopus appendages, it essentially drove him insane and left him in like a really screwed up state. And so that's kind of where that comes from. But when Peter Parker meets an Otto Octavius from a different universe, after they kind of face off against or are kind of distracted and defeated by Tarantula, then it's a little hard for Peter to grasp, because from his perspective, he looks at Superior Spider-Man and says, you're who Octavius could have been. Like he could have been a good guy. Now that's the thing. PS4 Spider-Man does not know the whole story behind Superior Spider-Man. And so that's why he kind of looks at him and sees him as what the guy could have been. And it's cool because what it does is it sets things up for betrayal. But again, like there's a little bit of a skirmish, at least it seems that there's going to be one, only for Octavius to kind of explain what's going on, say, hey, look, I will help you here. And then we can go forward and we can focus on, on what this mission is, on this, pan-dimensional calamity. Now, again, that was the nature of Superior Spider-Man. And that's why we kind of have to assume this version of Superior Spider-Man that we're seeing was towards the end of the story. And the reason why I say that's one of the things to bear in mind. The reason why I say that, guys, is for those of you guys who never read Superior Spider-Man, when Doctor Octopus first took over the body of Peter and went forward as that version of Spider-Man, that what ended up happening is he was focusing on kind of like improving Peter's life. And then as time went on, he understood what it meant to be a hero. And so he went from this anti-hero to an actual hero. And then it was like, okay, we'll fight the good fight. I'm still arrogant and I'm still kind of a dick, but like I'm being a good guy. That's what made him so awesome. That's what I loved about Superior Spider-Man so much was how he was written and how his character was developed by Dan Slott. But in this instance, because of how he's acting here, we can largely assume he's a version of Superior Spider-Man towards the end of the story. And so of course, where the two of them face off against Tarantula and defeat him quite readily. I mean, it's a pretty handed defeat. What this does is because of the nature of Doc Ock as Superior Spider-Man, Peter Parker goes with him. PS4 Peter Parker says, okay, fine. Because of what you've shown me in terms of your character, who you are, what you're about, then I'll go with you. Now remember, Miles Morales exists alongside Peter in the in Earth 1048 in that PS4 universe. And so of course, this is basically, Peter saying, hey, look, you got to guard the nest now. Like it's your job to make sure everything's okay. Mary Jane Watson is kind of like the person behind the scenes helping Peter out while also working for the press. And so, it's kind of a cool little scenario as it unfolds. It's very like Clark Kent and Lois Lane like in terms of the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane. But, with him kind of saying his goodbyes and then going with Superior Spider-Man, they essentially jump into the future to whatever this massive threat happens to be. Now, what we end up finding out here is that this is basically the return of the Inheritors. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what that means, I will explain this again once we actually get into Spider-Geddon proper. The Inheritors had been around for a while, like Morlun had been around for a while, but we didn't really know how deep the rabbit hole went until we got into Spider-Verse. And what we ended up learning was that Morlun was kind of like a vampire that fed on people who symbolized animals, which we're not going to go into because it is a little bit bonkers. What we ended up learning was that Morlun was only one of several Inheritors, and those Inheritors themselves would literally like reach out into the multiverse, grab spider totems, and then bring them back and consume their life essence. And so what ended up happening was that at the end of Spider-Verse, the Inheritors themselves were kind of defeated by being dropped off on what was basically a nuclear irradiated world, because it's what affected them the most was all the nuclear fallout and radiation. And so they ended up just having to kind of reside in a safe house. What we end up learning here is that somewhere along the line that the various members of what was essentially the spider community were sending drones in to check on the Inheritors to make sure that one, they were there, and two, to see whether or not they had died. But what ended up happening was the Inheritors were taking these drones and breaking them down. The drones were basically sending signals through the dimensional barriers back to those who were watching them and then informing them of what was going on. What this did is it created a tether. It created a bridge. If a signal could be sent back from the drones to those individuals who were watching the Inheritors, then what it meant is the Inheritors could ride that signal. What it also meant was that this is information being sent back and forth. And so using cloning technology, what the Inheritors had been doing is they had basically been transferring their essence from the world that they were trapped on back into the Marvel Universe in order to transfer their consciousness and then create new bodies and resurrect themselves. And so that's why this has really been popping off, because there was basically like a panic button that was hit, an SOS that was hit, the big red button was smashed and saying the Inheritors are coming back, which is kind of turned into a regathering of the entire Spider universe. So again, that's one of the reasons why in order to really understand Spider-Geddon, you have to read Spider-Verse. So I invite you guys to check out my videos on Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run, and then my videos on Superior Spider-Man, and then I'll actually upload a full story video on Spider-Verse so you guys can get caught up on that as well. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.